I worked on a haunted farm and discovered its cursed secrets. I never should have opened that door. The moment my hand touched the cold metal, a shiver crept up my spine. That barn stood far from the others, shadowy and crooked, like an old man whispering secrets to the wind. I'd spent most of my summer here, tending to chores that felt increasingly strange. There were whispers among the crops, hushed tones that led me to question everything. Locals spoke of lost souls, of laughter turned to cries. I shrugged it off at first. Just stories, right? But that infamous night twisted my beliefs. The air turned sharp and unsettling. Darkness wrapped itself around me like fog, dense and clutching. The smell of damp earth mixed with something sweeter like decaying fruit. It was wrong. I could hear the sounds of the night. A rustle, a low moan, the crack of a branch. My heart raced. I glanced toward the shadows, catching glimpses of movement. Shadows darted in ways that made my body tense with dread. Were they alive? Or was I losing my mind? Each day, I felt the tilt of normalcy shift. Sacks of grain moved overnight. The sound of whispering sent chills racing down my back. I could taste the fear in the air, thick and palpable. There was a spot in the cornfield where sunlight seemed to vanish, replaced by an eerie gloom. The chill ran deeper than the October winds. I found strange symbols carved into the soft wood of the barn. Were they warnings or invitations? It seemed too late to turn back now. And then there was that night. The moon hung heavy, casting an otherworldly glow. I decided to sneak back into that barn, feeling a brief flicker of bravery, or perhaps madness. Darkness swallowed me whole. My skin prickled as I stepped inside. The sound of creaking wood echoed like a ghost's laughter. I reached for the flashlight, its beam cutting through the black, revealing shadows that danced and twitched in the corners. Suddenly, a thud rattled behind me. Panic surged. I spun around, heart pounding like a drum. Silence. Just me and my racing thoughts. I aimed the light toward the source, but all I saw was nothing. Then, a whimper floated through the cold air. It wasn't from me. It sounded like a child. My breath caught, my chest tightened. I was alone, wasn't I? I crept toward that sound, each step heavy with dread. What was I going to find? And just as I reached for the latch, a figure emerged from the Shadowsa, face twisted with anguish. My scream was swallowed by the night. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. I stumbled back from that ghastly face, the cruel features warped by despair. Its eyes were hollow, like black wells pulling me in. A hand emerged, thin and tremulous, reaching for Megwiding me into the night. I wanted to run, to flee back into the safety of my car, away from this accursed farm, but my limbs were frozen in place, caught in a web of fear. Help me, the child's voice rasped, echoing against the barn's rotting wood. With every word, the shadows thickened, shifting around as if responding to the plea. The air shivered with a presence I could not see, but I felt every nerve in my body scream to escape. But something deep within me compelled me forward. I had to know. My mind wrestled with the knowledge that nothing good could come from this curiosity. I took a tentative step closer. The figure of the child flickered, contorting like smoke blown by the wind, but their gaze remained fixed on me, imploring. Please don't leave me, they'll find me again. I swallowed hard, the gravity of their despair weighing heavily on my chest. Who will find you? I whispered, my voice trembling. A gust of wind rattled the barn door, slamming it shut with a deafening bang that echoed through the dark. The child jolted, eyes wide, trembling. Not them, not them. Panic pooled in their voice, becoming a shriek that reverberated throughout the barn. I could feel something else in that instant, a horrible darkness shifting in the corners, rustling, breathing. The shadows breathed. I whipped around, the flashlight beam darting into the gloom. The sudden movement revealed more faces, more figures trapped in the dark, twisted expressions of sorrow and hatred. They lunged toward the beam, their mouths moving in silent screams, fingers clawing at the air, desperate and pleading. The child's hand reached for me again, and my chest tightened in response. "Help us!" They all cried, their voices blending into a haunting chorus that melded with the wind. My heart thundered in my ears, and I stumbled backward, colliding with a stack of hay bales. The soft thud barely registered as the shadows collapsed closer, licking at my feet, drawing me into their cold embrace that I spun back to the child just in time to see them dissolve into fog, lost among the writhing forms that now encircled me. The barn seemed to pulse, walls swelling and constricting as if alive, feeding off my fear. The air thickened, swirling with a sickly sweetness that made me gag. This was wrong. Everything was wrong. "What do you want?" I choked out, hating myself for the tremor in my voice, for the cracks in my courage. A shadow drifted closer, features sharpening into a distorted visage of a man. It beckoned for me, its eyes blazing with a hunger that sent ice through my veins. "Join us." Forever in the dark, the child's voice echoed again, mingled in my mind. "Don't let them take you. Don't forget me." I tore my gaze from the man's terrifying grin, back towards where the child had stood, hoping against hope to see some trace of them, some sliver of light in this engulfing dread. But all that remained was swirling darkness, eager to swallow me whole. As the shadows closed in, a deafening crack ripped through the barn like thunder, the very foundations shuddering. My instincts surged time to escape. I whipped around, sprinting toward the door. The shadows hissed behind me, dragging at my legs in a desperate attempt to cling to me. But I pushed through, my pulse roaring in my ears. But when I reached for the latch, it would not budge. Panic surged anew, hot and striking. The whispers grew louder, angry and chaotic, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. The door shuddered as if something on the other side pounded against it, trying to force its way in. Suddenly, it burst open, the chaotic whirlwind sweeping through the barn like a tempest. I stumbled back, eyes wide with horror, catching a glimpse of an alien world beyond. And then the first of the shadows shot forward, its fingers outstretched, reaching hungrily for me. Everything happened in an instant as I turned, desperate to dive back into the shelter of the barn. I was met with darkness, a void of dread closing in. Just before the world went black, a chilling voice whispered into my ear. "You belong to us now." The darkness smothered me, leaving me breathless, and I felt myself being pulled into the depths of the abyss, the cold embrace squeezing tighter until the last piece of my consciousness flickered and faded. I woke up gasping for air, the scent of damp earth and mold flooding my senses. My body lay sprawled on the floor of the barn. The chill of the ground seeped through the fabric of my clothes. I raised my head slowly, bewildered, eyes darting around to reorient myself. Shadows danced across the uneven walls, flickering and shifting in the weak light filtering through the cracks. Had it all been a dream? Or was I still trapped in some ghastly nightmare? My heart raced as I pushed myself upright, and that's when I noticed Ida's presence lingering in the corners of the barn, coiling and unfurling like smoke. It crackled with energy, a dark miasma weaving through the wooden beams, whispering words I could almost grasp but never quite understood. The air felt electric, thick with malicious intent that I shook my head, trying to dispel the remnants of that dreadful pull. I had felt a longing for the dark that both terrified and fascinated me. As I struggled to stand, a sudden chill ran down my spine. I felt eyes upon me, penetrating and alive. I turned around slowly, dread gripping my heart once more. Glimmers of light flared up in the depth of the barn. These were no comforting rays. This was the glow of something unholy. Eyes of the anguished souls trapped within, surveying me with a sorrowful yearning mixed with wrath. I could hear them chattering amongst themselves, their whispers gnawed at my sanity. The air hummed, laced with frantic cries that rose and fell like the wind, but I couldn't make sense of any of it. All I could discern was a constant calling, a beckoning towards the shadows. "Help us," the voices echoed. Every word wrapped around my skull like a vice, drawing me closer to the dark. I stumbled toward the center of the barn, captivated by the whispers that seemed to burgeon from every corner. "You can save us." As I approached, the shadows swirled more vigorously, and the air thickened with a sugary sweetness blending with the putrid stench of decay that now overwhelmed me. I resisted, the remnants of my cautious self pushing back against the siren call. Suddenly, I was struck by a strobing visiona flash of what once was. The barn transformed around me, filled with bustling figures in faded clothes, laughter blossoming in the echo of long-lost time. Children ran and played, their innocence a stark contrast to the festering malaise I felt now. But as quickly as the vision appeared, darkness swallowed it whole. The laughter was replaced by hollow echoes and cries that rose like smoke in the air. "Join us." The voice was deeper now, layered, resonating with the voices of many. Through the veil of shadows emerged a figure, shimmering and shifting like liquid night. It swayed gracefully, yet there was something undeniably grotesque about its form. Its face contorted, every feature a marionette pulled by invisible strings, an amalgamation of despair and fury. My breath hitched in my throat as I realized the figure was no longer alone. They were crowded about me, the haunting specters forming a morbid gathering. "We are bound together. You cannot escape." Their declarations seeped into my being, wrapping around my heart, squeezing tighter until I gasped for breath. That I fought against the tide of terror washing over me, yearning for the safety of my car, my home, anything other than this place of cursed souls. Yet, my feet remained rooted on the barn floor, as if their cry for help had dug roots into my very essence, binding me to this hell. But amongst that gathering, I caught a flash of familiar childlike eyes. The same eyes that had pleaded with me, their bottomless gaze cutting through the chaotic cries. "Don't let them take you." The warning rang clear, drowning out the malicious whispers surrounding me. As I locked onto the spectral child, something in the shadows became agitated. The mood shifted palpably. The barn trembled, floors creaked as if angry spirits were riled up. "No, not them. They don't belong with us." The shadows churned violently, and with them, grasping hands shot toward me, an ethereal wave crashing down in an effort to capture my soul. Every nerve screamed to flee, but my body was paralyzed, caught in the magnetic pull of fear and desperation. I felt myself fading, slipping close to that dark embrace once more. Just as I thought I would be lost forever, a feral roar echoed around, suddenly filling the air with a heat that turned my skin prickly. The barn walls exploded outward, a searing brightness erupting, piercing the oppressive darkness, and the chatter of the grasping souls transformed into horrified shrieks. From the chaos, I was hurled backward, tumbling across the mud-streaked floor, but as I glanced back, the spectral child was gone, and a figure emerged from the light, an ominous silhouette stepping forward, a caregiver to the cursed, perhaps? A warden to the shadows? And then, a soft, familiar voice echoed in the new silence. "Welcome back. I've been waiting for you." In that moment, I realized nothing was ever truly over. The true horror was yet to come, and my heart plummeted as I understood I was not alone. A surge of emotion crashed over me, drowning my thoughts in a rush of terror as another presence loomed close behind me. "Join me," it hissed, warm breath ghosting across my cheek. I turned, my heart pounding, only to face the void from which the shadows had rushed, the eyes of darkness burning into my soul, holding more than despair, but terrible promises of power and pain. Before I could react, it reached for me, the familiar child's voice now echoing empty words in the distance. "Don't forget me." And just like that, I was caught between the realms of terror, destined to face whatever fate awaited in the dark recesses of that cursed barn. The barn shuddered as the shadows coiled tighter around me, the weight of despair pressing down like a suffocating shroud. I stumbled back a step, feeling the cold breath of the dark presence behind me, each exhale a seeping thread of dread weaving into my skin. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, the rhythm syncing with the whispers that had shattered the silence of the barn. "You can't escape what is yours," it hissed, the words slithering like serpents through the stagnant air. That I staggered away, desperate to distance myself from that voice. But the oppressive force of the shadows followed me, the barn morphing with every movement. The very structure seemed to pulse alive, its wooden skeleton creaking as though lamenting my plight, the walls closing in as I raced toward the door, a splintered portal of potential freedom. Just as I reached for the handle, fingers grazing the cold metal, an icy claw latched around my wrist, seizing me in a vice of despair. I swung around, staring into the dark void that was no more than a fuzzy outline of nightmare. But within the swirling mass, faint forms shimmered, faces contorted in agony, eyes wide and pleading. They weren't just watching, they were expecting. Watching me with a horrifying hope, as though my survival could unlock the chains that bound them here. Save us, they murmured, their voices now layered, entwining with the whispers of the shadows, a vortex of desperate need that twisted gut-wrenching regret with imminent terror. I shook my head, the flickering fear turning into a firestorm inside me. I was here to escape, to run, to not take part in their twisted play, but the grip tightened, dragging me toward the precipice of darkness. My heart raced as memories of those innocent eyes flashed before me again. The childhood warned me. Their gaze seemed to pierce through the shadows, urging me to remember the truth I'd been too terrified to accept. Suddenly, a piercing shriek shattered the air, a sharp, shrill sound that wrested me from the compulsion that gripped my body. It came from the corner of the barn, the dark veil parting slightly, revealing a sliver of light that cast long, ominous silhouettes. Shapes writhed and ripped through the dark, but not one approached me. They recoiled from that radiant beam. Stay back. The silhouette shouted, the sound ripping through the shadows. The dark entity paused, swaying as if contemplating this new danger. Release washed through me, cutting the ethereal ties tying me to the dread. I pulled away from its grasp, collapsing to the floor, scraping against the cold and damp wood that I in that moment. The barn shuddered once more, harmony breaking into chaos as the dark entity reacted, shrieking in pure rage. You don't belong here. It echoed, tones dissonant and wild. I looked up, my breath caught in my throat as I realized what stood in the light. It was a figure, cloaked in a brilliance beyond shadows. The spectral child had transformed into something ethereal, radiant against the backdrop of despair. Get out, they cried, their eyes swirling with determination. They pointed towards the opening, the path to safety pulsing with palpable energy. My instincts screamed at me to run, to take their invitation and escape this hell, but something inside me hesitated. The other souls surrounding medid, they deserve my abandonment? A part of me quaked, torn between the desire to leave and the impulse to save those who had suffered for so long. Please, don't leave us. They cried in unison, surrendering their desperation once more. The child's glow flickered, fading slightly as I wavered, their small face a mask of anguish and resolve. You can do it. You must save them, but don't let them claim your spirit. With a gesture, the light flared brighter, piercing through the shadows, forcing the dark presence to recoil further. That I scrambled to my feet, torn in two, the lure of freedom on one side, and the wails of the damned on the other. Your choice. The voice of shadows growled, melodic in its malice. Embrace the darkness within you, or live with the pain of forsaking those who cried out for connection. Before I could act, the light pulsed again, and the shadows surged forward, an avalanche of despair crashing toward me, stretching out ghostly hands, each one clawing for a piece of my soul. Choose, the child shouted, and with that became a mere flicker, half-formed, on the brink of being consumed by the shadows themselves. That I inhaled sharply, the tightness in my chest becoming unbearable. Was I strong enough to resist? In that moment, a thought struck: what if I could save them, and still make it out alive? My heart raced with a newfound resolve, and just as the shadows began to engulf everything, I screamed, I won't abandon you. The barn shook violently, a cacophony of wailing spirits erupting as the space itself seemed to fracture under the weight of my choice. And in that blinding moment, dark tendrils constricted, swallowing everything into silence. Then, numbness. I stood in the void, surrounded by infinite darkness, but suddenly ambushed with a clarity. What have I done? The question lingered with anguish as I gazed into the abyss, a weight filled with unanswered promises and haunting whispers, and then I heard it. Behind me, a crackling sound, soft at first but swelling into a haunting chant, the very source of darkness now forming words. Welcome home. I turned, chilled to my core, to see the unfathomable number of eyes watching me, a glimmering horde of the forsaken. And just beyond them, the child's light flickered but dimmed, fading quickly into the overwhelming shadows. Fear gripped my heart, twisting it vengefully as dread filled every fiber of my being. I was no longer the savior I had hoped to be. No matter my efforts, the haunting melodrama of the shadows only pronounced the terrible truth. Everything I had done had led me into their embrace, sealing my fate among the damned. As they surged forth, clamoring for my spirit, the cold realization met his was only the beginning. I was never meant to leave the barn at all. Don't forget me, the eyes of the child echoed, lost in the gathering dark, as I felt the foundations of my reality begin to crumble around me. The air thickened as shadows coiled tighter, slipping beneath my skin like venom. I could feel the cold tendrils of despair wrapping around my throat, constricting until I could barely breathe. I staggered backward, weighed down by an unseen force, as the malevolent whispering resonated around me, deep and insistent. You cannot escape your destiny. I blinked, desperately searching for the spectral child among the darkness that rushed in like a tidal wave. The light had dimmed to a faint glimmer, barely a flicker visible through the suffocating blackness. "I'm here," I choked out, my own voice lost in the echo of madness. "I will not leave you." But my words felt hollow and futile, swallowed by the overwhelming force of sorrow all around. With each passing moment, the shadows grew bolder, their forms more menacing. Past the periphery, I glimpsed figures, a mix of the anguished and the grotesque, more real than any nightmare. The hollow visages of the lost souls twisted in silent torment, their mouths agape in a wordless scream, eyes wide with a haunting expectation that sent chills racing down my spine. "Join us," they taunted, their voices a dissonant choir. They extended skeletal fingers toward me, beckoning me to step closer into the swirling void. I could almost sense their pain, a pulsing echo that reverberated through my very soul, a compromise I yearned to mend. Within the dark, I spotted the comforting glimmer of light, the child's light, but it flickered dangerously, strained against the encroaching walls of despair. "You have to fight," the child cried out, their voice a fragile thread of hope. "They want to pull you in. Resist, but how?" My feet felt rooted in place, the barn transforming around meth wooden beams twisting together, becoming sinister shapes full of razor-like edges, potent with an energy that buzzed with palpable dread. Suddenly, the wood creaked and groaned, and the ground beneath me pulsed as though alive, a living organism hungry for the warmth of despair. I could feel it, the dark entity rooting itself deeper. "Please," the child implored, stretching an ethereal arm towards me, shimmering like dew in the fading daylight. But my eyes were drawn back to the darkness, where anguished souls twisted in pain. They were the very essence of a never-ending sorrow, and for every agonized gaze turned toward me, my heart wrenched harder in indecision. "You can't leave us. You have to help." I took a step back, forcing myself to remember why I was here. I didn't belong among the shadows, didn't want to become one of them. Each breath tasted like ash in my lungs, thick with fear. Yet the whispers crescendoed, an alluring melody laced with deceit. What if you embraced it? You, too, could know this freedom. You could finally belong now. I shouted, shaking my head furiously. "I am not one of you." The shadows responded in riotous rage, an eruption of furious whispers blending into a deafening roar. "Dare to deny what you are?" they clamored. "You are entwined with us. Just let go, and eternal unity awaits." The child's light flickered again, shimmering with a feeble yet fierce intensity. "You can't let them take you," they cried, but even their voice began to tremble under the suffocating weight of darkness. Panic surged through me, and I grasped for anything that could recapture my resolve. I needed to act, to make a decision before the shadows engulfed my mind, forced me to become one of them. But what choice lay before me? Sacrifice my freedom to save the damned, or step back and let their cries fade into oblivion? The shadows surged, howling as one dark wave, attempting to breach my sanity. An icy sensation washed over me, and suddenly, it felt as if the barn itself was a malevolent being, breathing heavily, surrounded by walls of pulsing dread, increasing with every passing heartbeat. Spirals of darkness reached out, flickering as malevolent arms, fingers brushing against my skin, igniting my horror. "Don't listen to them," the child cried out, desperation lacing their voice as the eddy of shadow closed in. "You're stronger than this." That spark of hope, ignited something deep within, a flicker of realization I didn't belong to the shadows. I could reach for the light. Gritting my teeth, I rallied my courage and focused on the child's unwavering glow. I will break the chains that bind you. I yelled into the cacophony of despair. The shadows recoiled, momentarily halted by the fire in my voice. But the reprieve was brief, and a wave of anger crashed down, enveloping me like a thick mist. The cries of lost souls swirled violently, rising to a fever pitch on overwhelming cacophony that threatened to send me tumbling deep into their tragic chorus. And in that moment, I felt something shift within me, a darkness bubbling up from my depths, whispering promises of power, offering a chance to escape, to embrace whatever lay ahead. It clawed at me, consuming my resolve while seductive tendrils snaked through my consciousness. Join us. Become one. Feel the release. They beckoned that I faltered for just an instant, the shadows wrapping around me like scalding chains, coiling tighter until despair became a siren's song. I gritted my teeth, trying to tear myself free. But then the light surjetted exploded, enveloping me in a crisp vacuum of bright, white energy. Fight it. Remember. The child's voice pierced the shadows, clear and unwavering, echoing through the darkness. In that moment of clarity, a figure emerged from the swirling abyss, grotesque and towering, its eyes blazing like molten fire. It extended a hand toward me, the offered darkness far more inviting than the glimmering light that fought ever so hard to preserve me against the tide of evil. You are ours. It bellowed, the very ground shaking beneath its might. Just as I felt the last remnants of hope begin to slip away, the ground splintered, a vivid crack coursed through the barn floor as I grasped the edges of consciousness, the child's light wavering and desperate. This is not the end. My heart raced, pounding against the weight of the shadowy weight pressing deeper. Every inch I fought pushing closer to an unimaginable descent. I had momentous single splintered second left to decide. And suddenly, I was being pulled into the darkness, the shadows clawing hungrily at my skin, whispering my name like a prayer. Then I felt cold fingers brush against my back. The grip was swift and unyielding, dragging me into a chasm of despair. The last thing I heard before the world went silent was the fractured wail of the lost voices, echoing, reverberating against the void, and then nothing. Just a silence that should have screamed through the dark. But within that emptiness, I felt Ida pulse. Something ancient and powerful, and just beyond theta distant crash, an unseen barrier fracturing, a rift widening. And then, like a splintered thought reaching for the light, it tore through the darkness as I plunged deeper. Welcome home, it echoed a chilling, familiar resonance as I was pulled further into the abyss. The echo didn't fade. It only deepened, and that's when I realized there was something worse waiting for me on the other side. The silence was an unsettling void, yet I could feel the weight of something immense pressing against my consciousness. It was as if I were suspended in an endless inkwell, floating through a darkness thick enough to choke on. In that suffocating abyss, I wondered if this was the end, or merely the threshold to a new kind of horror. A disorienting sensation gripped me, as if I were caught between two worlds, my essence being pulled apart, like an intricate weave slowly unraveling. Each heartbeat echoed in this dismal expanse, louder than a funeral bell, combating the silence that sought to clutch at my sanity. That pulse, once faint, surged in a heartbeat that resonated with an intoxicating rhythm, drawing me further from the familiar darkness. My instincts screamed at me to resist, but a desperate curiosity clawed at the edges of my mind. A subtle light flickered at the periphery, tethered to an impractical hope. I felt the gravitational pull of the shadows shift. They writhed and festered, merging like ink spilling in water. The specter of something anciently powerful loomed close, a sinister presence that cloaked me in dread. You will find me, it hissed, the words slithering into my core, resonating with something deeply buried within, an unholy affiliation that made my skin crawl. Through the murky depths, fractured memories began bubbling to the surface of my mind. Fleeting scenes danced before me. The barn's wooden beams, old and charred. The faces of the lost souls I had glimpsed, staring at me with vacant eyes, forever longing to escape their fate. The soft, shimmering light of the child, now slipping from my grasp as though it too were succumbing to the overpowering darkness. Then it happened. A raw jolt of energy coursed through my veins, breaking through the oppressive gloom, and the void around me shattered, exploding into burning fragments that filled the air. The light surged, hot and unyielding, and from the ashes emerged a realm of twisted realistic landscape like no other, a grotesque mimicry of the world I knew. The barn was merely the beginning. Now, I stood upon a warped terrain where time and space seemed to dissolve. Gnarled trees twisted and turned, their branches tangled like skeletal fingers stretching toward the stormy skies, choked by the ashen clouds swirling in unnatural patterns. A cacophony of whispers surged again, the same demented choir from before, louder than ever, merging into a single haunting dirge. Join us. Rest with us. Find peace in surrender, vision pulsating. I found myself drawn to the far end of this accursed place, where something monstrous lay crouched, its silhouette obscured by the flickering shadows. There, half embedded in the soil, I recognized the outlines of graves, dozens of them, each marked by stones overlapping each other in a tangled embrace of despair. Those who came before you. A voice rasped, tender yet filled with venomous exultation. I turned, my heart pounding fiercely as I locked eyes with a figure gliding forward, its features darkened by shadows, but its similar smile that promised perdition was starkly clear. They would never leave. Just as you want. The entity extended its arm, hinting at an invitation layered with dread. Chill raced down my spine as flashes of turmoil erupted from its grotesque form, swirling tendrils of anguished souls snapping ferociously against the earth. I could see their faces now, anguish twisted into an eternal cycle, their hollow shrieks echoing in this dark sanctuary of lost hope and malevolence. My breath caught in my throat, and the despair was almost palpable as I understood this was not merely a passage to my fate. It was a reaping ground, a collector of forgotten sorrows. These were souls bound by desperation, swallowed and enslaved by the very shadows that sought to consume me now. Your essence is palatable, a missing piece to our tapestry, the voice cooed, and I could feel my very spirit teetering on the brink of relinquishment. Embrace it. Become one with us. In the suffering yours is a destiny even more potent than theirs. In that moment, the dread morphed into paralyzing terror. The memories of despair solidified, spurred by the figure's insinuations, the agony of the child I yearned to save, the grip of darkness that pulsed through my veins, the unnameable fear of becoming just another lost soul. A surge of emotion twisted painfully in my chest. This grotesque tapestry needed unwinding, and there was only one thing left to do, if conjuring the very essence of defiance. I tore my gaze from the shadows constricting around me and focused on the distant flickers of light that pierced through the torment. The child's light. It flickered wildly, pulsing like a heartbeat in sync with mine, waiting for me to remember who I was, to reach back and pull them away from the brink. Fight back. We are more than this. The child's voice surged through the heaviness, a beacon wrapped in hope. The shadows recoiled momentarily, and I felt the gravel shift beneath my feet, bolstered by renewed determination. You will not take me. I will not be a pawn in your games. But before I could break the grip of the wretched presence, pain lanced through my soul, sharp, jagged, tearing at the edges of my reality. The tormented faces of the souls on the graves twisted toward me, mouths agape in silent screams, layers of agony coiling out into the darkness. Their anger flared as the figure before me transformed, its smile warping into a shape of limitless horror. No, you cannot escape. It bellowed, a sound like a damning wind cutting through the air as shadows surged from every direction, seeking to drag me down again into that pit of despair. In a sudden rush of primal instinct, I turned on my heel, racing toward the light that beckoned me desperately. But I knew that the figure wouldn't let me go so easily. I could feel the very ground beneath responding to its master's will, shuddering, trembling, as the air thickened with anger and turmoil. Just then, as I dove through flickering light, my fingers grazing what felt like the edge of salvation, the fresh darkness enveloped me like a tidal wave. Pain ripped through my being as the whispers crescendoed into a thunderous roar, and I sensed that I had just drawn the ire of the malevolent force holding court in the shadows. Suddenly, an ear-splitting crack echoed across the expanse, and I sprinted down what I could only describe as a precipice, into a swirling maelstrom of emotions, the cries of the damned ripping at my sanity. Then, everything stopped, a momentary pause laden with palpable tension. Just as I felt a fleeting moment of reprieve, a hand grabbed my wrist from the shadows, pulling me back toward the gravity of despair. The last flicker of the child's light disappearing beyond reach. In those final seconds, I felt a sinking realization, a truth embedded deeper than fear itself. There would be no simple escape from this horror. It had become a part of me, twisted and dark, an inescapable shadow creeping into my essence. And as darkness engulfed the child's light entirely, the last thing I heard before being dragged into the void was a chilling whisper that echoed now and forever. You were never meant to leave. The ground beneath me shifted like quicksand, a grotesque mixture of earth and bone threatening to swallow me whole. Panic surged through my veins as I felt the hand tighten around my wrist. I gasped, fighting against the immovable darkness that threatened to envelop my very being. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of distorted voices swirling around my ears, each one more desperate than the last, a maddening symphony of regret and loss. Join us, they pleaded, a chorus of despair that clawed at the remnants of my will. The specter clutched my wrist tighter, drawing my gaze back to the figure that loomed just beyond the fray of shadows. It tilted its head, an unsettling smile curling its lips as if savoring my dread. This is the moment you realize there is no escape, child. You are bound to this horror as they are. With a primal scream rising in my throat, I wrestled against the specter's grasp, desperate for air, for light, for anything that reminded me of what I was fighting for. But the shadows pulsed and churned, wrapping around my ankles like tendrils of a monstrous beast. I felt myself sinking, the screams growing louder, overtaking my very thoughts. I was about to plunge into the inevitably of fate entwined with despair, and just as I thought the darkness would consume me entirely, a blinding flash of light erupted from within. The very core of my being surged with an energy that was not entirely my own, a force that felt both foreign and familiar. It illuminated the abyss, revealing grotesque faces twisted in torment, their mouths moving with silent cries, reaching out towards me in shared anguish. Fueled by that desperate energy, I twisted my arm violently, breaking free from the specter's grasp. It stumbled back, momentarily disoriented, and I staggered away, driven by an instinct more primal than fear. I dashed through the encroaching shadows, dodging swirling mists that threatened to pull me back into their suffocating embrace. Each step felt like a betrayal to the weight of the despair wrapping around me. My heart pounded steadily, echoing the haunting rhythm of the heartbeat that had drawn me into this wretched place in the first place. Ahead of me, I saw a flicker, a remote spark in the darkness, pulsing like the fragile heartbeat of hope. I plunged forward, desperation fueling my pace. I was so close now, battling against reminiscences of tormented moans that rose to a fevered crescendo, drowning out everything but the clarity of my purpose. Fight, echoed the child's voice once more, clear and unwavering, an anchor against the maelstrom of shadows. I could feel its presence too, lurking just beyond my reach, but I could not allow that light to disappear again. I propelled myself forward, the pulsating warmth pulling me toward it, until with a surge of defiance, I broke through the barrier and stumbled into the radiance that enveloped me instantly, the familiar glow wrapping around my skin like the embrace of a loved one. But the moment of relief was short-lived. Darkness roared behind me, its fury palpable. I turned just in time to see the specter gathering its forces, shadows swirling like a tempest, faces emerging and merging, an amalgamation of torment that twisted and convulsed in the light. You cannot hide from us, it screeched, rage exploding as tendrils of pure malice shot toward the light, snaking to ensnare me once again. Adrenaline surged, and I knew I had to act fast. Listen, I shouted, trying to connect with the lost souls swirling around the fringes of the encroaching darkness. You were spirited away, but your fate is not sealed. We can break free together. My voice tremored, but I felt a connection, a ripple of recognition from among the tortured faces, hope sparking where there had been none before. Suddenly, As though responding to my desperation, the flickering light pulsed with more intensity, sending a shockwave through the encroaching darkness. For an instant, the specter's grim countenance faltered, eyes widening in outrage as waves of light lanced through the despair, momentarily pushing back the shadows. It shrieked a sound carved from centuries of anger and longing, piercing the very fabric of reality. You will pay? It lunged, tendrils reaching for me, desperate to drag me back into the depths. But I was not prepared to give in. Not now. With the child's voice echoing in my mind, every ounce of will surged within me, and I stumbled toward the light. We can overcome this together. Break free. Remember who you were. The air thickened with tension. Those lost souls slowly began to sway, their faces shifting from fear to resolve as they started to move with me. A collective force ignited within the air, a swirling maelstrom of light that began pushing back against the darkness, resonating with every heart still lingering in despair. But just as I thought we had the upper hand, the shadows convulsed violently, roaring back with a ferocity that shook the very ground I stood upon. No, you will not take them from me. The specter surged forward with unimaginable rage, and the shadows morphed into a monstrous behemoth that lunged for me. I screamed as they snapped around me, and for the first time, the weight of its presence brushed against my skin, chill so profound I felt a part of my soul begin to slip. And just as my vision dimmed and shadows began to encroach, I realized the light flickered around me, still fighting. But was it enough? I could see the figures of those lost souls beginning to rise, their anguished voices blending into a newfound harmony that pulsed like a heartbeat echoing in the depths of the night. This was a battle not just for my life, but for theirs, too. But in that horrible moment of clarity, as hope pulsed louder than despair, an unending scream erupted from the shadows, and in the blink of an eye I felt the ground tremble as the darkness formed a colossal figure, towering and wretched. Your defiance will end here. The last thing I saw before the shadows swallowed me was the nightmarish visage leering down, and as my vision faded, I was left hanging between two worlds, a single question burning through the remnants of my awareness. Was this truly the end, or merely the beginning of a far greater horror? The air grew heavy with a silence that enveloped the space, the only sound my own ragged breathing slicing through the oppressive stillness. I floated somewhere between awareness and the endless void of shadows that had grasped at my soul. Was I truly awake, or merely a specter caught in the echoes of despair, forever reliving this torment? The moments stretched, an eternity of uncertainty before clarity bit through the fog. I blinked hard and found myself crouched low against an earthen floor, a place thick with the scent of damp loam and something more fetid. The light was gone, snuffed out like a candle, leaving me cast once more into the suffocating darkness. Tentatively, I reached out, fingers brushing against the rough, uneven ground as I pushed myself to rise. Panic threatened to claw up from my chest like a beast disturbed from its slumber. I had to find a way out, to breach the cold suffocation that pressed down upon me. Desperation ignited my resolve, and I stumbled forward, one hand trailing against the wall as I navigated this new prison formed by my fears. But a sudden sensation brushed against my chica energy, cold and wicked. I froze. It felt like fingers trailing across my skin, sending icy tendrils of terror down my spine. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to turn toward the source. The air thickened, an invisible force wrapping around my throat like a noose. "Who's there?" I rasped, my voice a ghost of its former strength. Silence. But then it came, soft, whispering voices layered over one another in a sinister choir, creating an incantation of longing and despair. "You shouldn't have come here." The shadows thickened around me, morphing, coiling like serpents eager to constrict. My heart raced as I stumbled further into the encroaching gloom, every fiber of my being urging me to flee. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were leading me deeper into their abyss. "We are waiting." I paused again, gripped by the icy realization the whispers didn't belong to mere apparitions. They belonged to the souls that had been lost, trapped in this horrid realm just as I was. Desperation laced with rage surged within me. I was not merely a victim, I was also a vessel of their pain. Suddenly, a flash of movement in the shadows caught my eye. I turned, breath hitching as I caught sight of a figure emerging from the edge of darkness. It wasn't fully formed, but a grotesque mockery of the human shape, shifting and warping. Its hollow eyes, voids of despair, locked onto mine, and I felt the breath leave my lungs. "Join us," it hissed, voice layered with an echo of thousand mournful cries. "The darkness can give you what you seek, freedom from this life." That my stomach churned. Freedom? I spat, a fleeting flicker of defiance igniting. "This is a prison, and you know it." But as I stood my ground, frustration giving birth to rage, another shadow emerged, the specter I had escaped from earlier. It limped forward, pulling itself from the depth of darkness with a sound that crawled beneath my skin. "You are not strong enough," it taunted, waving its fingers as if summoning shadows that writhed around it eagerly. "You think you are different? You are just a whisper in the abyss." As it spoke, countless hands began reaching out from the periphery, clawing through the darkness toward me, each one twisted and contorted with longing, desperation painted across their grotesque faces. "Help us! We are lost!" They pressed forth, an unyielding wave of sorrow that crashed against my resolve. It felt like drowning. How could I possibly help them if I couldn't even save myself? "Break the cycle," said the first figure, its voice merging with the multitude. "They will devour your soul like all the others if you do not accept your fate." I felt the tide of desperation surge around me. Horror crystallized within my chest. My thoughts spiraled. What if I didn't fight? What if I succumbed to the void? The darkness thrummed beneath the surface, a seductive lure whispering promises of peace. But at what cost? Was liberation worth becoming a part of this wretched horde? With a deep breath and a defiance I didn't quite believe, I shouted, "I refuse to be bound. I will break this cycle. I will not be lost." In response, the darkness recoiled, a chorus of anguished wails cascading through the air as it recoiled from my proclamation, the shadows swirling with fury. The specter glared at me, an unholy light ignited within its monstrous eyes. "You cannot outrun the truth, child. Your heart beats with regret, and you will pay for your arrogance." Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble, cracks snaking through the earthen floor while the shadows writhed with a newfound frenzy, converging into a monstrous shape that loomed larger, filling the narrowing space. "You have angered the void." Then, just as I thought the walls were going to collapse on me, the specter lunged. My instincts kicked in, and I dove to the side, narrowly escaping its grasp. What remained of my hope began to dissolve as the desperate cries of the souls echoed in my ears. I could feel the weight of despair pressing down on me, clawing at my very being, transforming my defiance into dread. And then I saw a fissure in the ground, glowing faintly with a blue light. A path? Or my doom? There was no time to think. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline flooding my veins as I sprinted toward the light, the monstrous figure still thrashing behind me, sending echoes of despair cascading like a storm. "You cannot escape," it roared, and I felt the very air tremble under its rage. With each step towards the fissure, I understood this was my last shot at freedom, or at oblivion. Just as I leapt, the darkness erupted behind me with an earth-shattering roar. A split second before I vanished into the fissure, I felt the crushing grasp of despair reaching for me one last time. In that fleeting moment of transition, my last thought was a haunting realization: if I failed to conquer what awaited me at the other side, then perhaps I would not just become part of the shadows, but the very thing that hunted them. And then darkness. The deep blue light enveloped me, wrapping around like an embrace as I fell through the fissure. It consumed my screams, muffling the deafening chaos above. I braced myself for an impact that never came, instead drifting through an endless void illuminated by that eerie glow. The weightlessness sent chills through my body, both freeing and terrifying. Suddenly, I emerged into a space that felt more like a disorienting dream than reality. I stood on a solid surface, but it shimmered like a mirage, pulsating beneath my feet. Wisps of ethereal fog curled around me, whispering secrets that floated just out of reach. The light illuminated shadowed figures in the distance, their outlines wavering, as if caught in an eternal dance of despair. I turned slowly, recognizing the place that sprawled before me, a distorted version of the farm I had known, but twisted beyond recognition. The house loomed in the distance, its facade darkened and grotesque, windows shattered like gaping wounds. Time held no meaning here. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, broken only by the faint echoes of laughter that morphed into cries. "Welcome," a voice rang out, tender but laced with malice. It shimmered in the air like ripples on water, drawing my gaze. A figure glided toward me, a woman clad in white, her hair flowing like liquid silver. But as she drew nearer, her face morphed, becoming a mask of anguish veiled in sorrow. It was a familiar face, one I had glimpsed in faded photographs strewn across the farm. "My mother. You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Not again, Mom." The words slipped from my lips like a prayer, a mixture of yearning and dread. But as I took a step closer, her features twisted into a grotesque grin, a shimmer of something dark lurking behind her gaze. "They're waiting for you," she continued, her voice now layered with the whispers I had heard in the darkness before. "You think you escaped? Let me show you." In an instant, the ground shifted, blurring as shapes began to slide into view. Me family, my friends, each one more twisted than the last, their faces warped by grief and longing. They reached for me, hands clawing through the haze. "Save us," they cried, words dripping with desperation. Yet, beneath their pleas, I felt a surge of fear. Each familiar face flickered with a darkness I could hardly comprehend. Shadows seeped from their forms, tendrils stretching out like hungry mouths, trying to pull me into their embrace. "You belong with us," they cried, an impossible longing threading through their warnings. The brightness around me began to dim, sucked into the chaos of desires wrapped in torment. My heart race quickened, and I turned to run, but the very ground shifted beneath my feet, a churning whirlpool that threatened to drag me down into the depths of their despair. "No, no, no," I gasped, stumbling back as my breath became ragged. I could feel the void's claws grasping at my ankles, whispering of an eternal existence caught between realms, a limbo filled with souls clawing for release. With my heart pounding in my chest, I searched for escape. The glimmering light that had once guided me now flickered like a dying star. "I will not be like you," I shouted, but the damning voices grew louder, drowning my pleas in a torrent of sorrow. "Abandon hope," the female figure, my mother, rasped softly. "Join us, my love." As panic flooded my system, I felt a sudden pull at my consciousness, like fingers gripping tightly around my thoughts. Images surged, the farm from my childhood, the fields, the barn, the warmth of family dinners. But lurking beneath those memories were shadows, festering truths I'd buried deep. The spirit of betrayal and despair clawed at my sense of reality, leaving me gasping. "Break the cycle," an echo called from beyond, reminding me of my vow against the darkness. And yet, from somewhere in this madness, a flicker of clarity ignited within. I had come here determined. I would not yield to their torment. With all the strength I could muster, I yelled, "I'm not afraid of you. I know the truth now. You cannot bind me." At that moment, the shadows surged forward, howling in indignation, filling the air with a cacophony of anguish. The figures of my family shrieked as they were consumed by their own despair, their grotesque forms dissipating into wisps of darkness swirling angrily around me. And then, the ground split open beneath me, the shimmering surface cracking wide, revealing a gaping maw of blackness, eager to swallow me whole. My last glimpse of light fractured into 1,000 pieces as I felt myself plummet, the echoes of despair now morphing into thunderous roars that shook the very fabric of the air. I grasped for something, anything to save me, but it was too late, and as the darkness closed in, a chilling whisper slithered through the void, winding through my mind like a predatory snake. "Welcome home." And with that, the shadows swallowed me whole, fading into an expanse where all hope flickered and died. The coldness wrapped around me once more like a blanket, thick and suffocating. I floated in that endless void, remnants of anguish weaving through my thoughts. Gasping for breath, I struggled to reconcile the overwhelming despair that pulsed beneath my skin. How had I come to this place again, the furthest reach of dread? I would fight, I told myself. I had to. But the shadows thrummed with a life of their own, whispering secrets that tickled my ears with an insidious melody. "You belong to us," they sang, their voices harmonizing in a dissonant choir that echoed throughout the abyss. The dread licked at my mind, drawing me deeper into the sanctity of their darkness where escape felt like a cruel mirage. Images flickered on the edges of my consciousness: the barn, the haunted farm, the tortured souls. Faces morphed in an eternal dance of longing and fear: the child with hollow eyes, my mother's twisted visage, the wretched specters of those lost before me. They hovered on the periphery, mere shadows longing for something they could never reclaim. A flash of a memory ignited familiar voices entreating me, pleading with desperation to save them. I could hear their cries, could almost feel their rage bubbling forth like a tempest. "Join us." Fueled by lingering defiance, I surged through the shadows, battling against their magnetic pull. With every ounce of courage, I reached into the darkness that swirled around me, desperate to find the flicker of that otherworldly light. I had to remember what it felt like to be free, untainted by the despair that sought to consume me. And then, from the thrumming chaos, a figure emerged, a silhouette shimmering in the distance appeared, still and ethereal, a stark reminder of all I had lost. The child. With joy and fear intertwining within me, I stumbled forward, the light wrapping around me like a fragile embrace. "Help us," the child breathed, their voice a breath of hope amid the swirling madness. The light flickered, struggling against the constant encroachment of darkness. "Fight back, don't succumb. You have the power to save us." But as I moved toward the shimmering glow, the shadows erupted, expanding and tangling around my feet, like desperation clawing at my psyche. The figure of my mother returned, her once familiar form now contorted and monstrous, veins of darkness pulsating through her like the very essence of sorrow. "You cannot save them," she screamed, her voice laced with rage and anguish. "You have already chosen your fate." In that moment, I understood the twisted truth. I was not here to save the lost. I was bound to be a part of this endless cycle of despair. The realization crashed over me, salty tears mingling with the air as the shadows surged closer, their whispers growing into an angry roar. "You are ours, child. You cannot escape the fate that binds you." I thrashed against the tendrils grasping my limbs, but it was futile. The darkness wrapped around me, squeezing my heart with malicious intent. As my resolve weakened, the spectral child's anguished gaze flickered with uncertainty, wavering between encouragement and sorrow. But I was not ready to yield completely. I had felt the touch of hope too keenly to let despair extinguish it. I lifted my chin defiantly, forcing out words against the suffocating grip of dread. "I am not what you claim. I won't be bound." There was a momentary pause as shadows recoiled in surprise. My defiance seemed to ignite something dormant within the ethereal boundaries of the darkness surrounding me. The chaos rumbled as if the very fabric of the void was unraveling, fracturing beneath my assertion. The ground beneath me quivered, the lights cascading in brilliant hues that illuminated the grotesque faces encroaching upon me. "They are trapped," I screamed, my voice slicing through the air. "You, too, could break free." Suddenly, a cacophony of whispers erupted, swirling in a tempest that shook each haunted soul scattered in the grips of the dark. Their faces flickered with confusion, uncertainty. It was a momentary glimpse of hope in their lost despair. Just then, a piercing howl erupted, and shadows surged forward, their anger exploding like a storm that threatened to swallow me whole. They lunged, tendrils stretching with furious intent as my conviction flickered in the chaos. But beneath their fury, I heard the child's voice rise above it all. "Remember us. Remember who you are." I focused on that glimmer of light, the small luminous thread binding the haunted souls to their past. I could feel it tugging at my very essence, urging me onward. Gathering heart, I steeled myself against the waves of despair crashing all around. "That I am not afraid," I roared, and with that final proclamation, I burst forth in a radiant flash, the warm luminescence exploding around me, illuminating the wretched faces of the shadows, transforming into ephemeral reflections of hope. I could feel the oppressive weight of darkness shatter away, the whispers transforming from angry shouts to gentle pleas as the room began to shine. A brilliant light, welcoming an escape from their suffering. The boundaries of reality warped as I dove deeper into the glow, determined to break the chains binding us to this hell. The shadows clawed behind me, but they were losing their grip as the light surged forth, illuminating the void in spectacular fashion, illuminating the space around. This was it, freedom was within reach. But amidst that brightness, a chilling whisper snaked through the air, threading through the chaos like a serpent's tongue. You cannot save them, not without allowing yourself to become lost. The vibrant energy encircled me in a final embrace. The realization struck like lightning. Perhaps the path to salvation wasn't about saving them all. Perhaps it was about embracing the darkness within myself, the power it offered, the choices I could embody. And just like that, I found myself in the barn once again, a far cry from the cold void. Each pulse of the shadows from before permeating the air felt warm and inviting, twisting around my body, threading my very being as the echoes of the lost began to fill me with their whispering songs, drawing out my most fearful thoughts. Join us, they echoed, their voices intoxicating and sweet, weaving a tapestry of dark memories interwoven with the choices I now understood. Finally, we can be together, and without hesitation, I stepped deeper into the fold, shivers racing down my spine as a brilliant smile spread across my face. This was home, I could feel it. Shadows enveloped me, enveloped my being, and I finally understood. Peace was an illusion, because here, darkness didn't represent fear, it was a transformation. Don't forget me, I whispered to the light now snuffed out in the distance, an echo of innocence lost to despair. I will remember you. And as I embraced the darkness, laughter filled the air, resounding with the cries of those who had waited for someone like me, who carried the promise of power wrapped in pain. Forever entwined in a dance of shadows, the cycle would continue, but my heart beat steady. I was home.